participating remotely. I'm Joe Perfin. I'm a citizen member of the Audit Committee. Thank you.
I'm Dan Howell. I'm a citizen member of the Audit Committee.
Lee Cheney, CPA member of the Audit Committee.
Don Coles, citizen member of the Audit Committee.
Cynthia Newbell, Richmond City Council representative and president of council.
The Honorable Court, City Auditor's Office.
Jennifer Harville, City Auditor's Office.
Lou Lassiter, City Auditor.
Sheila White, Director of Finance.
Jim,
Jim Simpson, Inspector General.
and back in the corner over here.
Lee Ann Castro, City Auditor's Office.
Rochelle Carter, City Auditor's Office.
Okay, and then could we start here?
Bob Seidel, Deputy Chief Administrative Officer for the Operations Board.
Sabrina Joy Hawks, Deputy Chief Administrative Officer for Finance.
Here, the local Deputy Committee.
Second, Jesse. David Summers, Deputy Director, DIT.
In the far corner back here.
David Kochansky, Procurement Services. Sarah Raring, Department of Social Services. Misty Thompson, Department of Social Services. Selena Deal, Deputy Director of DIT.
Charles Todd, Director, IT Department.
Welcome to everyone. Delighted to have you here.
And Miss Nye is in the garage and on her way up.
Okay. Well, hopefully she'll get here before we get to the major stuff. The minutes were circulated earlier. There's also a copy of the minutes that are with your handout materials. Is there, do I hear a motion that the minutes be approved?
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Second.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion is approved and the minutes are approved. Thank you, Rochelle. Appreciate you putting them together. Greg Bussing, we've got you on the line, I think.
I'm here.
You're going to status of the single audit.
Yep. Sorry. Okay, I want to give you an update on where we stand with the financial statement audit and the single audit. So single audit is ongoing. We work with the city auditors to perform some of the testing. I think they've completed their portion of the testing. We're still working on a few areas that we have open. We're hoping to wrap that up as soon as we can. We're probably going to early next year, but we're trying to get that done. As far as the ACFR goes for the financial statement audit, we received a draft of the ACFR over the weekend, and our team worked over the weekend to tie it out and to review it, and we provided comments back. So work manager's working on getting those comments resolved and getting us an updated document. The report's due the 15th to the state, and it looks like we're not going to make that date, but we're working to have the report ready to be issued as soon after as we can.
When do you anticipate that will be?
We're hoping within the next week or two after the 15th. We're still working through. We've been trading comments with management. We've been working with them to get some things done. We need to complete the tie out, which is tracing all the numbers from our work into the financial statements and make sure they agree. Getting a clean document, completing our QC review. We'll add about a week to 10 days to that, and that's in addition to my review. It's also a second concurring partner review.
Is there anything specific that has caused a delay this year?
I think
good getting it out on time.
That's what we're pushing for. It's just, I think GASB 87, which was the new standard on leases, was a heavy lift. That's impacted all governments this year. So effectively, management had to review all the leases that the city has and then go through and determine whether or not they met the long-term lease criteria, then calculate the asset or liability related to that. And that actually goes from the lessee and the lessor side, so you had to do both sides of it. And then the reporting that's related to it. And I think management has some turnover this year too. I think they've had wholesale changes within the finance department working through this. I know Sheila and her team have been working diligently to get through this. We've had several calls with them to try to help push it over the fence, but I think it's just with it's a heavy lift, and I just think it's close, but it's not quite there.
Is someone speaking?
Factors, working together to create a perfect storm. And the fact that we're sitting here at this point, very close to the 15th, it's very disappointing that we're going to miss, but we didn't miss without good reason.
And do you anticipate completion by the end of the calendar?
I would really like to have a peaceful Christmas. So my hope is that we get it to Greg and that they have enough time to review so that we all can enjoy our holidays.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Chair, I just want to thank our CAO for giving the city council a heads up last evening to this very point, and certainly in terms of staff, why it isn't very hard. So thank you for that.
Mr. Saunders, welcome. Good to have you here. And Ms. Nye, welcome to you as well.
Sorry, I'm late.
Okay.
I just wanted to just briefly say that, while these deadlines are critical and we work incredibly hard to make sure we meet them, I just have to give a lot of credit to Sheila and her team who have overcome some tremendous challenges. And most importantly, in the last several weeks of getting the audit completed, they had to tackle, a fairly significant discrepancy or misalignment within the reconciliation. Instead of looking past it and pushing it along, they dove in and made sure that we had the right numbers to submit. So to get to I think an accurate reconciliation and make sure that our numbers are right was their primary focus and goal, and the team really pulled together to make it happen. I think Greg did mention that there's been significant turnover or vacant positions. I think we are roughly 46% vacant in the finance department. We're roughly, and I think 65% of the staff are new within the last 2 years. Finding qualified CPAs, accounting professionals that Sheila, I know, has prioritized hiring is a challenge in this competitive market. And my sense is that we, the broader administration, need to do even more whether it's from a HR side with recruitment, compensation, and that analysis and review, supporting them with stronger technological support. We will wrap our arms around finance and make sure that they have all the resources they need to not be, in this I just again want to thank Sheila, Sabrina Joy Hogg, who I think has been, supporting the team as best we can, for getting us to the point where, you know, again, we do have reconciled numbers and have submitted them to CLA, and I know they're going back and forth on additional edits before final submission, but, not exactly where we want to be, but it was a Herculean effort to get here, and it's not been for lack of work and determination by the team to address these issues.
Thank you. Does anybody on the audit committee have questions? Yes.
Yeah, just a follow-up question, I guess a little more specific to council. So if it's done by the end of this calendar year, when will it be presented to council as OD? Okay.
So I think that's January 6th? No, is
Third.
that the Tuesday, the 3rd?
Yeah.
We have the Monday's
That's a
holiday.
I think.
So I believe that our expectation will be to present it to you all at the first availability in January.
Okay.
Again, if you recall, last year, we were not able to, just given the timing of audit submission, council schedule, we presented it, I think, in about mid-January last year. I think we'd be prepared to present it at the first available opportunity. Councilman, I know you were asking for that final fourth quarter. Clearly, this is part of that, making sure we have the right submission, and then we'll brief council at the earliest opportunity.
Just from my understanding, the December 15th deadline, we set the deadline again, and are there any consequences for action?
The deadline is set by the state, so it's by state statute, that you need it. There are, I'm not aware of any consequences other than we need to publish a public notice. So that will go on the website today under our report section, just letting the public know when the report will be available. We also need to notify the state, so we will notify our contact at the state, Rachel Remy, that the report will be submitted and about the timing of when the submission will happen.
Do you want to speak a little bit about the February timeline for
Sure.
for Wall Street as
Yep.
kind of a secondary timeline that's critical?
So in addition to the statutory timeline from the state, there's also a timeline that we need to report on for our bond covenant, and that is February 5th. As Greg spoke to and I spoke to, we think we're going to be well within that. So in terms of, being late for that, we're not going to have to do any EMA filings to notify our credit holders that we are late. So as long as we meet February 5th, we should be in good standing there. And if we don't meet that date, we will have to post on EMA, but I don't anticipate that happening.
Anything else? Great, thank you very much. I appreciate your explanation. I'd like to turn now to the audit reports, and the first is the annual follow-up.
So this is something that we do each year. By code, we follow up on all open audit recommendations. Leanne is going to present the results of our annual follow-up. I'd like to recognize all the hard work she did along with all the folks that she worked with across the city. I believe there were a number of recommendations when we started out, and actually there's less than there were this time last year. So I'll turn it over to Leanne for the presentation.
So during fiscal year 2022, we reviewed 227 audit recommendations. 141 were from last year's follow-up, and 86 were newly issued during fiscal year 2022. Of these 227, 91 were implemented, 3 were removed, and 133 remained open. This is the first time since 2018 that we closed more recommendations than we opened. Of the 133 recommendations that remained open, 12 were considered high priority, 98 are medium, and 23 are low priority. Several departments made significant progress in closing audit recommendations this year. The Department of Planning, Development, and Review closed 22 of 26 open recommendations, including 8 of 9 from the 2021 Property Maintenance Code Enforcement Audit of their department. The Office of Community Wealth Building closed 14 of 17 open recommendations, including 13 of 14 from the 2022-06 audit of their department. Procurement Services closed 8 of 9 open recommendations, including 2 recommendations that were from 2019. And the Fire Marshal's Office closed 9 of 14 open recommendations from the 2021 Fire Prevention Division audit. And these included recommendations that were related to the inspections of schools and nursing homes. The recommendations closed from these 4 departments accounted for 58% of the recommendations closed this year. So we want to give special thanks to Kevin Bonk and his staff at PDR, Capricia Spellman and her staff at OCWB, Renee Alvarez and his staff at Procurement Services, and Chief Dyer and his staff at the Fire Marshal's Office for the effort they put in. This chart shows the 10-year trend of new, closed, and removed recommendations by fiscal year. The goal of the City Auditor's Office is to work effectively with the City Administration to achieve a rolling 3-year average of 70% of agreed to recommendations being implemented. For the last 3 years, 2020 to 2022, the average stands at 76%. And over the last 3 years, an average of 80 per year have been either closed or removed. This next graph shows an aging of the open recommendations. As audits are completed, we are continually adding more recommendations to the database. There have been 314 concurred recommendations over the last 3 years, and during the same time period, 239 have been closed, 13 removed. Recommendations are removed when implementation is not feasible or the process has changed so that the recommendation no longer applies. Ongoing audit activity always leaves a percentage of recommendations open, and over 76% of open recommendations are from the last 3 fiscal years. We work collaboratively with the administration to actively close recommendations. And finally, this was a scheduled audit of the fiscal year 23 audit plan with an estimated budget of 500 hours. The actual planning budget remained 500 hours, and total time spent was 479 hours. Any questions?
Before we get to questions from the committee, are there any comments or questions that the city administration folks wish to add here?
If I could, I'd just jump in and just say that this is, for us, this is a key focus in an area of continuous improvement for administration. Obviously, responding to audit recommendations in general is an area where it provides us tremendous opportunity for improvement. But we have put a real emphasis on ensuring that we meet and, as you can see through these numbers, exceed the goal of a 3-year rolling average of 70% closure rate on audit recommendations. So, we greatly appreciate the collaboration with the City Auditor's Office. A lot of team members, obviously department level, such as planning and OCWB, took a lot of effort on their part, but want to give a special shout out to Jeff Gray in my office who helped with the overall coordination of our audit responses to make sure we hit our closure rate goals.
Good, thank you. Members of the committee, any questions or comments? Don?
Could you comment more on the 12 that are considered high priority?
Yes. 6 of those 12 have implementation dates in the future. So we didn't follow up on them yet. We'll be following up on them either next year or the year that we think that they're going to be implemented. The remaining 6, 4 are being worked on. Those are related to, those are recommendations from the CAO's office, finance, OCWB, and fire. We didn't receive an update on 2 of those, but we're going to be meeting soon and hopefully getting an update.
Some of them are from the tower lease audit that we did last June. I'm looking at the list, and I know I gave Joe a copy Friday,
Right.
and we can email, it's just kind of hard to read it, 'cause there's so much information, but basically, some of them are from that tower lease audit that was issued last spring. One
Yeah,
from
it's
IT
actually
user access.
12 high priority related to the tower leases. And you've got 15 recommendations, and only one of those has been closed, leaving 14 open, which is a question that I wanted to follow up on Mike, and you remember when that was presented, it was pretty clear, and I think most members of the committee and administration agreed, that that function of dealing with tower leases was not in the right department.
Great.
Emergency communications did not have the expertise of the staff to deal with that issue. And the open question was, what can the city do to address that issue? Can you give us an update on that?
I feel like this could be probably summed up as we have recently, I believe, within our Department of Economic and Community Development, hired new staff in the area of real estate strategies. I feel like this is an area for their expertise in maximizing what opportunities we have, either through tower lease management or leveraging city assets for future leases. I would look at that with a combination of support from the city attorney's office to help bolster that effort. Probably an area I would love to come back to the next audit committee meeting with some further updates on.
If you do that, I would very much appreciate it. It's an important issue.
Yep.
So we'll look to get a follow-up report on that at the next March meeting.
That sounds good.
Just important to me is that the administration know what the 12 are.
Yep.
Are any, is that open for an extended period? I know most are within a year.
The oldest original date was what, Leanne?
2020.
2020,
And
Jill.
the original date
Yeah.
was 2021.
So, and some of these, the ones on tower leases, actually, we haven't hit the original expected date of closure. And a large part of the ones that, if you would have looked backwards on this list a year ago, were from the fire audit.
What was the number a year ago, do you remember?
141.
No, of high priority.
I don't know off the top of my head.
I think it was more than what it is now, though, I believe.
Obviously, my
We can get you
concern
that
is
number.
that high priority means high priority, right?
Yeah.
They're being addressed. If we disagree on whether they're high priority, that's okay. But if they are, then we get to follow up on them.
Would just say I'm partially encouraged by the fact that we're not at the proposed implementation date for at least several of them, but where we are past the original installation date. I will get with our team about our next steps and can hope to include that in our update in March.
I think that would be good.
And encourage your folks, when they're responding to these recommendations, that they give a realistic compliance date. Yeah, I mean, don't tell mama what mama wants to hear, tell her what you can actually do.
I totally understand that.
All right, anything else on the,
Thank you.
on the follow-up?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, ma'am.
just a couple quick things. I just also wanted to compliment the departments who closed, most of the recommendations, planning, community wealth building, procurement, and fire. And then the second thing is on the open recommendations, some of these older ones, I don't know, if Leo has a recommendation or if the committee needs to provide guidance on if they get to a certain date, are they worth revisiting? Some of the recommendations might not even be
We
valid.
look at them every year. So we dropped, in the last 2 years, there was one from 12. They got closed. There was one this year from 15. They got closed. If they get over 5 years old and they have some cobwebs on them, that's a valid issue, but seem to be not reaching that point.
Okay.
The ones that were taken off primarily, that were removed, a lot of those pertain to revenue collection at the GRTC
Okay.
audit that we did, and so
Okay.
the world has changed in regards to that. So those, that's why we removed those.
Uh-huh.
But I would say, yes, ma'am, we do look at that, and it's ongoing, and if it reaches that point of, hey, this is no longer valid, or we've asked enough time, then we will remove it. But right now, that aging on that pie graph, shows that we don't have too many with a whole lot of cobwebs on them.
Yeah.
So.
No, I mean, the pieces, the small pieces of pie look good. Just wanted to throw that out there.
Anything else? Okay, let's move to the next report if we could. This is on the CIP school maintenance.
So Brett Lewis is going to be presenting this to us online. He, felt, like he needed to do that, given his, he had a little bug hit him today. I'll just be honest, so he didn't want to put others at risk.
Hello, Brett,
So,
welcome.
You're muted, Brett. There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Yes, I did not want to spread any germs today. Jen,
So
are you
I'll
sharing
talk
this?
about this. This was an audit that was requested by a council member, and sort of the backdrop before we did this and put it on the audit plan. If you recall, like 4 years ago, there was some questions about some balances in the school CIP maintenance dollars. Council asked us to do an audit of that, which we did as part of a broader CIP audit. And it identified some concerns about the accounting. And Brett, I guess you're gonna go over the process by which the city works with the school system in terms of that, so. There we
Yes,
go.
The slides, can you all see the slides?
Yes.
You can see the slides. Okay. 1 second. Okay.
Jen,
Okay, so yes, so thank you. I just wanted to start off, this was, as Lou said, this is an audit from the FY23 audit plan. It was requested. I'd like to thank Leanne Castro, Andy Ramos, and Selma Thomas from our office. They worked diligently on the audit. And I also like to thank City Finance and Budget, as well as Richmond Public Schools Finance Office for all their assistance throughout the audit. It was a smaller scoped audit, but there was a lot of items that we had to review. Jen, you can go into the next slide. The objective of the audit was to review the controls and the reconciliation for RPS's CIP school maintenance funds. And the scope of this audit was the 4 years ending June 30th, 2022 in the current environment. And basically we picked it up right up from the end of the last audit. So a little background is a portion of the city's capital improvement plan. Funds are set aside for RPS. These funds should be used for capital expenditures related to the maintenance of RPS capital assets. And city finance's definition of capital project expenditures are that they are made to purchase, improve, or extend the useful life of capital assets of the city. And on a monthly basis, RPS's finance department will send a memo to the city's finance department of all the expenditures and the appropriate accounts they're supposed to be attributed to for the capital expenditures. And city's finance staff will review these and then approve or deny the expenditures before coding them into the accounts. As Lou noted, this was an audit from March 2019 that was requested then as well. And I've placed the ending amounts that we calculated as part of our reconciliation then on the screen. And those are the figures where we picked up and started this audit to bring it to the end of fiscal 22. Okay, Jen. This next slide is just the graphic of the reconciliation that we performed during this audit. We looked at all the appropriations, any amendments or transfers, and we looked at all of the expenditures for the 4 years for these 5 accounts. Go to the next slide, Jen. What works well? One thing we noted was the requests this time from RPS Finance were submitted monthly throughout the entire 4 years of the scope. It was an improvement over the last audit, as they were sometimes submitted quarterly, semi-annually, or in some cases annually. So that was a strong improvement, as well as communication between RPS and city finance was greatly improved. And we did review over 700 invoices that was provided by RPS. And all the expenditures that we looked at were properly supported, and they were all actually school-related invoices and supplies. So that was an improvement over last audit as well. What needs improvement, this table here shows the variance between the calculation of what the reconciliation was at versus what we calculated it to be at the end of calendar or fiscal year 2022. The one thing we noted was the entries recommended from the last audit to the CIP accounts hadn't been performed. So when we picked up our reconciliation from the last one, we had to note that. Also, we noted that the city's review of expenditures needs improvement, as some non-capital expenditures were capitalized, and these included walkie-talkies, moving or hauling services, modular rentals, and there were some software fees. However, from the last audit, the process had improved. And then also, in looking inside of Rapids, there were some issues with the keying into the Rapids accounts as well. For instance, there was one amount from the city side that was keyed into one of the accounts, but that was a small amount, right around $1,500. Okay, Jen, you can go to the next slide. In conclusion, we issued 3 recommendations with 100% concurrence, and all the implementation dates were through June or July 2023. We had initially budgeted 400 hours on the audit plan, and then 400 hours again after we finished planning, and we came in under that at 381.5 hours. Any questions?
Okay, Brett, thanks very much. Finance Department, any comments on this?
I think this is another area where you see our staffing is impacting our ability to get our job done. So while we would like to be 100% on having adopted the recommendations that came from audit, we still have some work to do. We do hope to close that by the July 2023 timeline, and work with Lou's team to relook at this to make sure that we're 100%.
Any questions or comments from members of the committee? Yeah, Mr. Cole.
Did RTS agree with your calculation of variances?
Yes.
Thank you.
And I would like to note, a lot of the ones from this over the last year were actually prepping Clark Springs to be the temporary Fox Elementary. So some of those 700 invoices that my team went through were from that effort to get it ready to be a school again. So.
Good collaboration then.
Any further questions or comments from members of the committee? Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Brett. Good report.
Thank you.
Okay, next, procurement services. Yolanda, this is you?
Yes.
Okay.
So we completed an audit of the Department of Procurement Services. It's a part of our FY 22 audit plan, that was approved by the committee. First, I'd like to thank the Department of Procurement Services and Director and staff for all their cooperation and timely response throughout this audit, as well as recognize our auditors Jennifer and Andy for all of their hard work. The objective of this audit is to evaluate the efficiency and effectiveness of the department and assess for compliance with procurement policies and procedures. We looked at the 12-month period ending December 31st, 2021, and the current environment. This audit focused on the IFP process, which is the invitation for bids, the RFP process, which is a request for proposals, and contract reviews. Just a little background about procurement services. Procurement services is the centralized purchasing body for the city, and its director serves as the principal purchasing agency. However, they have delegated purchasing authority of $200,000 to the user agencies and departments. BPS is responsible for handling the formal competitive procurement for goods and non-professional services and non-transportation related contracts for construction up to over $100,000, transportation related construction over 25, and professional services over 80. RFPs are used to procure goods and services through competitive negotiations. Those proposals that are received are reviewed and scored by an evaluation panel. The IFBs are used when we want to solicit competitive bids, and we're going to award the contract solely on price. And contract renewals can occur if the language is included in the contract, with funding available, and there's a mutual agreement between cities and the vendors. I will now turn over the presentation to Jennifer to discuss what went wrong and what needs to be.
Okay, what works well? Generally, the contracts executed through the IFD process were properly procured and awarded per the city's policies and procedures. 89% of the reviewed contracts were renewed prior to the expiration date, and on average, 40 days prior to the expiration date. The reviewed IFBs and RFPs were publicly posted in a timely manner in accordance with the city's policies and procedures, as well as regulations. Opportunities for improvement. We noted that some of the proposals received were not evaluated and scored, and explanations for why this occurred were not in the folder. We looked at 11 of the 11 contracts and noted some inconsistencies. The numbers are here. And this 4 out of the 11 review contracts were some proposals were received by the due date, but they were not evaluated and scored. And one of 4 contracts, the proposal was evaluated and scored, but not recorded on the bid log as being received. Contract compliance. We noted that there were opportunities to improve contract documentation to allow for more transparency and ensure compliance with procurement policies and regulations. DPS has made some changes in their process. However, the policies and procedures have not been updated to reflect the changes. For example, DPS policies require written justification for using competitive negotiations, and we were unable to determine how points were calculated and assigned for the cost evaluation criteria. Additionally, for contract compliance, we reviewed 12 contracts solicited through the IFB process. In general, goods and services were properly procured and awarded per the city's policies and procedures. However, improvements were needed in the review and assessment of the responsive and responsible of bidders. Contract execution timeliness. We reviewed 22 contracts and noted that 64% or 14 out of 22 were not executed timely. And this is in accordance with the DPS established timeframe goals. On average, it took 223 calendar days to execute contracts through the IFB, solicited through the IFB process, and 308 calendar days through the RFP or request for proposal process. Responsive and responsible assessment. There is an opportunity to improve how bids and proposals were evaluated for responsiveness and bidders' responsibility. Contract renewals, 8 out of 9 renewed prior to the expiration. 1 contract renewed 4 days after the expiration date. And we could not determine if the contract renewals were completed within the DPS goal, which is 82 to 152 days due to lack of supporting documentation.
I'd like to stop there. I think if you look back 3 or 4 years ago, there were a lot of contracts, or there were some contracts at least, that had been expired. So they are getting renewed prior to expiration, which is an improvement. I believe we had a purchasing audit or a split purchasing audit a few years ago where we saw departments needed to procure the goods to keep the business going, but the contract had expired, so you were pushing them to other procurement methods, or you would have things that were being procured and the contract had expired. So this is an area where they seem to be getting to things a little more timely.
Performance metrics. Implementation of better performance metrics would allow for the department to evaluate the department's efficiency and effectiveness. Best practices. DPS has partially or fully implemented 13 out of 17 best practices. And these best practices are the ones identified by the National Institute of Government Purchasing. Contract administrator training. According to the policy, the contract administrator should do annual training. However, right now, there's no monitoring to ensure that the required training is being done. We issued 17 recommendations with 100% concurrence. We have implementation dates through June 30th of 2023. With the audit plan, there were 800 hours. Budget after planning was 800, and the actual was 970 hours. Questions?
This was a big audit. A lot went into this, and a long, detailed report, I'm sure you've all read. Procurement services. I know there's someone here who was here.
Sue is, Sue, and we have the director too online, Renee.
Okay, great. I appreciate any comments or questions that you might have. Okay.
So this is Renee Alvarez, Procurement Services Director. Thank you for having me, and thank you for being here. I first want to say that I want to thank Lou. I want to thank his team. Jennifer, Yolanda, Andrew, they did a great job. I think they'd uncovered a lot of issues that this department has lived through over the past several years. I think we've come to concurrence and agreement on what needs to be fixed, what's applicable, and what isn't applicable. So, in general, Lou and his team and I and my team have been through these items a number of times. In our last session, I think we came to a lot of clarity on what exactly our processes are going forward. I just want to thank them for doing a great job, and we are in a trajectory to repair a lot of these problems. Many of them have been repaired or are in the process of being done so right now.
Okay, thank you. Chris?
Mr. Alvarez, thank you for your comments. I'm wondering the timeliness, finding, what's your path forward on that? That's something that has impacted council when we try to, procure services from time to time, as well as, I've heard feedback from staff and other city departments that it can really impact their effectiveness.
Thank you. We have probably about 20 initiatives which will cover every one of these recommendations, these findings and recommendations. We're in the process of working these right now. I believe by the third quarter, and this is a very, very kind of strategic view here, but by the third quarter of this calendar year, 23, we should have most, if not all of those findings corrected, implemented, and I'll pick a few items out. I think we can point to the RFP process. The request for proposal process has been it's been a problem for a long time. It takes way too long to get contractors on contract through a source selection. I have carved out and put a new process in place to try to work that to 180 days. You could see that it was, the effort was close to 300, if not more days for RFPs. We have a process that's going to go out in January to get to 180 days. It's documented, the flows are documented, the steps. We've collapsed a lot of the steps and combined a lot of the processes. And we'll be tracking each one of them on a schedule. None of this has been tracked in the past. It's sometimes, in the process, sometimes there are issues pre-award. Well, it's all pre-award, but prior to the solicitation going out in defining the scope and statement of need in the RFP, sometimes there's a long stretch in which we're working with the agency to help refine that with legal. So that takes a number of weeks, if not months. Then once the evaluation starts, there is a long stretch in which we're working with the evaluation committee, try to make sure that They're providing the right information, we're gathering the right information, and we're doing it appropriately. We are tightening up all those schedules, and that's one area, and I could go on a few more, but that's one area that I think is extremely important to try to reel in right now. So that's the one in the first one in the barrel here to get it done.
Thank you.
Councilman, may
You're
I
welcome.
jump in? First, I just want to, kind of speaking broadly to the audit, I think that the timing of this couldn't be better, given the fact that we have gone through the transition with the directors. I do think, and again, I appreciate Lou's comments about the progress that was made between several years ago under Mrs. Burrell, that she brought it to this place where we were not splitting purchases or operating with expired contracts. I mean, there was a significant lift. A few years ago, staffing was a tremendous challenge within procurement, but they worked very hard to fill key positions and gotten to a much stronger place. So Renee's inheriting a department that's in a much better position, but when he was hired was also challenged to continue to push us to the next level. Certain policies have been changed within the last, I would say, year or more around the thresholds for departments, moving that to 100,000. I think it had previously been at 25,000, so it gives departments more flexibility to follow appropriate processes. But in some ways, hopefully shrinking the areas where we need to go to a full RFP process. I think as we discussed with even the most recent procurement with the Labor Relations Administrator, I know we induced some panic within procurement when we put 120 days into the legislation. I think it realistically, we hit about 150 days with some very concentrated effort. So hopefully that is one example, one model of the type of timeline and process that Renee and the team are pushing for. We do just need to acknowledge that, an RFP process in its best case scenario is in that ballpark of 180 days. We certainly don't want it to be 360, but it does take time to do a full competitive open RFP with appropriate scoring and evaluation.
Lincoln, on one of the comments you just made, one of the statements contained in the department's responses was that there had been an 80 to 90% turnover in procurement staff during the period covered by the audit, which was frankly a shocking number when I read it. Has that improved? Is that turnover, I hope, substantially less today?
I'll defer to Renee on that.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Saunders. The turnover has vastly improved. We have recently had somebody resign. We're filling that position, and a few months ago we had a person resign, and we've already refilled that position. We have with the positions that we put in since I've been here, which is the 1 January of this calendar year. We've hired some extremely strong individuals, folks with a lot of procurement experience, a lot of contracts experience, who have done construction bids, who have done a wide range of professional services and non-professional service acquisitions. So I think we have a strong bench. It's over the course of this year, it's been trying to adapt them to how the city operates, how the city processes acquisitions, solicitations, and so on. And we're still getting our legs under it. But I think we're in a much, as I was saying earlier, I think we're in a much better position. We've got a much better trajectory to make a ton of improvements. And I have the full expectation that we've got some stability here in headcount, and I think it's really looking up. That's my personal opinion.
And if I could add to that, Joe, briefly, Mr. Chairman, I think, if you were to look at the trajectory, first of all, I think the leadership of Ms. Burrell was instrumental to getting a good team in place. But as you know, the competitiveness of city pay is something that we have to continue to be laser focused on, because, we can hire good people in and then see them poached by our friends across the street at the state or in surrounding localities. I think part of the turnaround in staff stability was when we were able to implement phase 2 of the Gallagher study in last year's budget. But it's also why we are immediately, or as part of this year's work plan, doing a full class and comp review for all city positions. We have to make sure we are staying competitive in the market if we want to retain the talented staff that we have brought on board, as well as fill any remaining positions.
Any further questions or comments? Thank you very much. Thank you for the report and the, yes, Don.
Just maybe more than one, but it strikes me when many of the audit comments are around that you can't find answers to your questions when you're doing the audit. So it leads me to believe that I could be wrong, that the turnover maybe at a different level than what you've spoken to, Mr. Alvarez, and the training in order to do it right, to keep the documentations current, is represented by so many of the comments in this audit. I mean, they're not the high-powered comments of shortening the cycle time and getting bids out. They're about documentation and the things you couldn't determine whether things were done properly. So could you comment on sort of the turnover in training? And then I think there's a recommendation here that you need to be able to train the agencies that are requesting this. So I just look at all the training that you have to do with the turnover, and it makes me desperate. How do you turn around a system when you don't even have the right data?
I appreciate the comments, Mr. Stidel. I really do. I think, there's not much I can do about the past. A lot of these problems, I believe, were related to some of the turnover. And we have an onboarding program which includes, from an internal standpoint, for folks coming on board, a buddy system, a new training regimen, to go over policies, to go over procedures, not just here's a book, go read them, but to come in and train people one-on-one with a buddy and some cross training as well as they come on board. It's a complex approach that we have here in the city to make this happen. There's a lot of policy. There's a lot of, we have standard operating procedures, and other documents, checklists, and so on that we have. We are cleaning those up. I've taken just about every SOP off of our StarNet side because they're being revamped right now. They're being revamped to reflect how it should be done. We're in all of those things. We're trying to shorten some of the cycle time. So from an internal training standpoint, we're getting our arms around it. I think we're moving forward with it. We have a structure we're doing. It's making sure that structure is going to affect each and every individual on the team. All right. And I will tell you that I will not go out and start training the agencies without making sure that my team is properly trained, so that when there is a question that comes into the Department of Procurement Services, the response is consistent. I know that there are agencies who hunt for answers, coming into DPS to try to find the answers that suits them so that they can move forward with something. And I believe that, from a standardization standpoint, from a procedural standpoint, and from an effectiveness and from a legality standpoint as well, we need to be solid in how we're responding back. So there is a plan for agency training. There's an audit finding in here that talks to making sure that contract administrators are trained annually, and we're tracking that. That's in one of the initiatives we're working through as well. But it's coming. There's going to be a curriculum. It's not just training, but there's going to be an entire curriculum that we're doing for agencies, from requisitioning to understanding bids, to understanding RFPs, understanding timelines, as well as many other, types of procurements that we do. So I hope that answers your question.
Renee, I'll just briefly add to that, that I think the audit recommendation and action steps, the response from the department on recommendation number 4, speaks a lot to what the question you asked, Mr. Cowles, the duplicative and antiquated system currently used for maintaining contract files versus a future shared drive, completely paperless system with a shared drive and centralized quality assurance. I think that is a key factor in getting to your concern about us not being able to locate critical items that are part of the substantiation of the contract awards and process that the city completed. So I think that since Renee talked more about the training side for the staff, I want to just briefly mention that centralized system, I think, is going to be a critical part of that process.
Really what I was getting to is
Thank you.
training of the job well, because you can have the right procedures, right? You can have great standard operating procedures, but if they're not trained to do it, you're going to get it, may not be implemented as well as you'd hope.
Yep.
And you got a big job. That was really my statement. If you have 50% turnover like you did in fiscal year 2022, and you've got to train all those people every year, let alone in your user agencies, it's like overwhelming to me. Anyway, I have confidence in you, and you got a big challenge.
Thank you.
Mr.
I
Chairman,
appreciate that.
would it be okay to just see if the DCAO for this portfolio had anything to add for this follow-up?
First, I want to thank Renee Alvarez. He has really stepped up to the plate. I push. Everything moves very slow for me. I push him. Sometimes I think I try to push him faster than he wants to go, but we've got to push. You will see some of the recurring themes. It's staffing, it's staff augmentation, it's permanent staff. It's also, the labor market is just very, very tough right now.
Yep.
Being competitive in wages is not enough. It's also, how do we treat our employees? What do we offer them? It's no longer the same labor market that we had 3 years ago. And we're working as an organization to figure out what our sweet spot is. There's got to be a hybrid sort of mentality where, there's flexibility in the work schedules. We have to rotate staff. We have to think about hoteling space. It's no longer the same job market or the environment that we're facing. But Renee has done a tremendous effort in just trying to move the department along. He's looking at templates. Everything that moves too slow for me, but the use of templates will help speed things up. I've also talked to him about becoming more of a centralized focus area where procurement is taking on more of the responsibility to write the RFPs versus the department, so we don't have the back and forth. It's because we don't have the expertise in the department to write some of this stuff, so we waste a lot of time in that sense. But in order to do that, he's got to get staffed up, so that requires more staffing. Historically, the internal service departments like finance, HR, budget, and procurement have been understaffed, under-resourced. We're trying to fix a lot of that going forward. So a lot of the automation, a lot of the findings that they have come from not automating. We have some very antiquated systems. Renee and I talked about putting in a whole new procurement system. Things are just done by Excel spreadsheets when it shouldn't be. And, you miss one entry and you no longer have that documentation. It really should be automated. And a lot of the findings will take some time until it's automated. We're finding that in HR, same thing, finance as well. Procurement's another big area that needs automation. So Renee and I also talked about hiring tech writers for specific instances like technology or engineering or really specific skill sets, bring them in as needed and bring them in on contract. So we're trying to be flexible with the department. and we're really trying to bolster some of the internal service organizations. Because that's the backbone of this whole city. If they're weak, all the other departments can't get their work done. You know, if Renee can't procure services, we can't pave streets. It's just, it's a spider web out there if the internal service departments are not fully staffed.
I just want to acknowledge the challenge the whole city has right now. And this, because we hear about it in almost every audit.
Right.
So, your big study is critical, and I don't know what the implications are for all of us taxpayers and all, but we need to do something to shore it up. Thank you.
Thanks for the comments and the audit. Unless there's anything further on this, let's move on to the Inspector General update. Emma Suna.
As you see, we've got currently 20 open cases, kind of the same issue, so many, 2 investigators, so we got to prioritize that and figure out which ones need to be bumped up, which ones can be held back a little bit, but we're working through that load. Correction there with the close substantiated, it should be 1, and that was a pretty good case that we had because it was one that a deputy CEO came in and said, hey, we think this might be going on, it could be fraud. Take a look at it. We were able to prioritize it, looked at it within a day or 2, gave the results back, took immediate appropriate actions, closed out. It was one of those textbook cases we like to see work with the interagency. It's very worked out real well with that. We had 2 unsubstantiated, mostly using inappropriate government use equipment and vehicles, but it was able to unsubstantiate and we're operating fine. And then we've got 1 that's referred out to a separate agency, and then 1 also that's referred out to a federal agency. And then just to add on the procurement piece, it covers that piece, but we worked a lot with procurement with the P cards. They're understaffed, like they're doing a phenomenal job with it. Every time we've gone in, they identify shortages, they identify possible inappropriate purchases, they identify great purchases. 2 people down there working P cards, and the P cards is a large.
Remind members of our committee what P cards are.
Purchase cards that are kind of your issued, that's regulatory issued credit card to departments, and the departments can go and purchase all kinds of different items with it, as long as it meets within the guidelines. And the procurement office has 2 individuals that run that, but they monitor every purchase so well. They identify anything that could be questionable. They correct it. They've done a phenomenal job with 2 people, because you're talking hundreds of thousands of purchases. So, kudos to the procurement guys for doing that. They've done a great job down there. Every time we've gone in to look at that, because that's one area we look at often, that comes to us, they're on top of it. It's been very good.
Good. That's good to hear. Okay, any questions of Mr. Asuna? Okay, thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is the audit plan status. Lou?
I'll try to be brief. Green means it's done. Yellow means it's in process. Red means we haven't started yet. We're about a third of the project's done. We've gone over 3 reports today. I would like to show that one other where it shows completed is that external audit report that our office was required to provide to the external audit firm. Primarily, it is single audit support areas. We have completed that work, submitted it to Greg's team, so that will be incorporated, that work into the single audit when it's issued, probably early next year, first quarter or so. The ones that are in process, one is the ambulance authority that is contracted out work through the DCA and CAO's office for the ambulance authority. I believe they're pretty much done, and they're going to be presenting the report at some point to council early next year. Is that the understanding, or?
I'll just add, we had a meeting with them today. I will say we encouraged them to get a time with council to brief the full council. I don't know that, I'd have to say we may need to look at whether that was included in their scope. They didn't seem to have that on their intent. They were gonna brief the RAA board and, I believe, President Newbell and the Chair of Public Safety individually, but, I would encourage all of council to have an opportunity to hear the result of that audit.
Looking around the new year to March, we hope to have DPU billing and collections, as well as the adoption program. We're hopeful. IT chargebacks is basically a smaller project that the administration has asked if we're recovering the costs that we should be in that area. We did do some special project work this last quarter on a small request from the Vice President of Council. She asked for an update on the delinquent real estate tax process or program. It was a very small project. So we should have 3 or 4 more to bring to you in March. And our hope is to get on the personal property tax assessments, which is a big audit, but we're trying to wrap up meals tax first, because it's sort of under the same general areas. I would say we're on target to hit what we need to on the scheduled audit plan.
Any questions of Mr. Lance? Okay, I think that is everything for the open session. We now need to move into the closed session. And I move that the audit committee go into a closed meeting pursuant to section 2.2-3711A19 of the Code of Virginia to discuss cybersecurity assessments and security plans and measures for the city information technology systems. Because discussions of such information in an open meeting will jeopardize the city's information technology systems. Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Lou, could you make certain that everyone who needs to leave?
Right, and we may need a second, especially with those that are online. If you're not in this session or the closed session, we'd ask that you leave the Teams meeting now.
Is now reopened. Thank you very much. Unless there's anything further, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you for an excellent meeting.